Today we're going to be talking to Annie Pratt, the president of ATLIS. Annie, how are you?
Good, Miranda. How are you doing?
Not too bad for it being 115 out.
No, I know. Oh my gosh.
Well, I'm really excited to get into this conversation. I always think it's interesting to learn about all the innovation that's happening, especially in your industry. So I'd love just an overview for our listeners know, what you're working on and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so ATLIS is an electric vehicle technology company. We're based in Mesa, and we're really working to bring the world's first electric work truck to market. But the way we're doing that is pretty unusual. So there are a lot of companies building electric trucks, and they're really focused on the truck. But we're really focused on the battery technology that powers the truck and the chassis underneath it. And so we've developed proprietary battery technology that allows us to charge very quickly, which for some of these work-centric use cases, you can think of like electricians, people who work for utility companies, people in construction and agriculture. Charge time is a huge problem right now, and that's what's holding them back from switching from gas or diesel trucks to electric. So we really set out to solve that problem and have developed our own battery cells and battery packs that charge in a fraction of the time of a typical electric vehicle battery. So that's our sort of secret sauce. We're working to bring the battery tech to market right now. So we have built the first production units and are just scaling that product line. And then from there, we'll work toward bringing the platform, which is sort of the electric chassis under the truck, and then ultimately the pickup truck to market late next year.
So, that makes me kind of wonder, what are the key differences between having an electric battery for a work truck versus a normal vehicle? Is there more wear and tear on these? What's the need for the differentiation?
It's a great question. So work trucks are built for towing and hauling and driving long ranges and being able to tow and haul for long ranges. So today where like typical EV batteries fall short is really being able to support those long range, high intensity sort of towing use cases. And that's where our battery really makes a huge difference.
And what would be considered long range?
So we're looking at having 300, 400, and 500 mile range options, which is really just comparable to what you get out of a diesel truck. Today in EVs, you'll see anywhere from like 80 to 100 mile range. A lot of the companies are working toward higher range, and really that's because if you can deliver a higher range, then charge time doesn't matter as much because you're not recharging as frequently. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to kind of know like how this company was even created. Was it out of demand from the market? Someone just loved batteries? Like, how did you guys come about?
Yeah, so Mark Hanchett's our CEO and founder. He started the company in 2016, really trying to figure out how could he take his diesel truck and turn it electric because he didn't want to pay for diesel anymore. And in looking to solve that problem, he realized, one, you can't buy batteries that actually support the like towing and hauling requirements that he had and that he was used to in his truck. And he is an engineer by trade. So wanted to really dive into that problem and solve it and realize there's a huge opportunity here. No one solved this yet. Why don't we solve it? And let's do it by starting with the battery, because that seems to be the biggest pain point right now.
And how did he get you to join him?
So Mark and I worked together previously. We were at a company called Axon that is also in the Valley. And he was at it for a couple years before I joined. I joined a couple of years ago in 2019, really after he had proved out the battery tech. And I thought, oh my gosh, we need to do this thing. And so he had a proof of concept. And since then, we've been figuring out, okay, how do we go from proof of concept to like getting this product to market?
And how is that going? How's that process going?
It's fun. It's going really well. So we last week actually revealed the first battery cell that came off our production line. So it's a huge milestone for us. We've gone from proof of concepts and prototypes and a ton of design work to actually building sellable product. So that's where we are today. And now we have a scale problem of how do we go from building 1 cell, 5 cells, 10 cells to hundreds of thousands and millions of battery cells. And then how do we get the platform and the truck to market as well? So those are still very much in the prototype phase.
And I mean, when you're describing this, all the things you're saying about making a better battery, I mean, you're making one for this purpose, but why wouldn't this just be a normal battery for electric day-to-day cars?
It absolutely could. And that's something that we are open to as a revenue stream. So while we're focused on these work use cases, there are a lot of companies focused on general consumer use cases, commuter vehicles, smaller sort of niche markets like tractors and golf carts and forklifts. And we are open to working with partners and looking to find partners who are building vehicles in those scenarios so that we can build battery packs for them.
So, I mean, electric cars is really just kind of a hot button discuss. Like, no one wants to pay for gas. Everyone wants to save the environment. All these different people are trying to solve this problem. I mean, how is the market saturation with this?
There are a lot of companies focused on electric vehicles, and every OEM has really kind of found its own niche. So there are a lot of consumer car, luxury car companies. There are also quite a few truck companies, but they're really solving for the F-150 equivalent. So it's not necessarily a work truck, a heavy duty truck. It's more of a consumer truck, someone who might be camping on the weekends and not necessarily towing horses across the country. And so that's really our sort of corner of the market. But there are a lot of companies doing really interesting things to sort of fill out the different use cases that I think all kinds of consumers and workers are going to have.
And, as you're kind of like finding those niche markets, I mean, is there room for like collaboration? Do you guys ever say, hey, I figured this part out? Or is it generally still kind of like a Wild West type of market?
It's a little bit of a Wild West. There's no electric truck on the road today. They do not exist. A lot of companies have prototypes, but no one has shipped trucks to customers. So it's a bit of a race. But also there's going to be multiple. I mean, you look at gas and diesel today, you've got Ford, GM, Toyota, Dodge, all these companies have trucks. And I think as the adoption to electric grows, we're still going to see multiple brands offering products in those spaces.
Yep. And as people are kind of adapting, I mean, does that market of people with work trucks really show that there's like a real need, or do you think that they'll be kind of like, I'm going to wait till so and so does it, then I'll adapt? I mean, how do you think that that's going to go when it finally launches?
Well, in trucks, it's really interesting because the trend setters are the people who own fleets, or the companies who own fleets. So if you look at people who have a fleet of, say, 10 trucks on a ranch or a farm, they're making purchasing decisions based on total cost of ownership and overall efficiency. So they're really focused on the bottom line. And those types of companies are shifting to electric, I think we're going to see consumer follow, because they follow the trend of the construction workers, the agriculture workers, the miners, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. I think of Amazon saying that they're going to make all their cars electric. I mean, same kind of decision, just in a market that we don't necessarily hear as much about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, as you guys are kind of working on your brand, working out how you're going to get, all this information out, I mean, I'd love to just kind of know the history of your name.
ATLIS. That's a great question. I wish we had this big, huge, awesome community around it. We kind of don't. Mark started the company in 2016, and it was really just him and this idea around battery tech and the ultimate vision around trucks. And he started with a name, Volta Motor Vehicles, and decided it was super obvious and he didn't like it. And so he did a survey of some people who had expressed interest on the website and ultimately got to ATLIS. And I think it's been really cool because while it sort of came to be a very simple name, and that's how we got it, I think the sort of connotation with ATLIS and the world and trying to solve these ecosystem problems really resonates with what we're doing now. But honestly, it's a total coincidence.
I just wasn't sure if it was and I was staring at an ATLIS and then it hit me.
Nope.
So, I mean, that kind of brings me to another really good question. I mean, as you're looking at rolling this out to the market, I mean, I was kind of picturing and you'd roll it out to all of, the farmland areas and expand from there. Or is there, a huge global strategy when you guys take it to market?
I think there's a global opportunity for sure, but we're really focused on starting in our backyard. So we have 50,000 reservations today across the world, really, but
Wow.
a huge concentration of those are in the Phoenix Valley. And there's a huge benefit to us by starting to roll out product locally where we can have a high touch relationship with those early customers, make sure things are going well, and make sure we're learning quickly. So we'll start here and then expand west to California and then up the west coast to Oregon, Washington, and then over to New Mexico, Texas, and sort of work our way around. We call it the EV smile. It's basically the west coast, the southern border, and then up the east coast finally.
I mean, you just described a really great road trip too. Like,
right?
I'm like, I want to go there. That sounds great. That sounds really good too. As you have these people that are early stage, like, yes, I want this product. I mean, what are the expectations as to like, okay, we have this concept, we're rolling it out. I mean, do you have timelines that you've committed to?
We are, like I said, we got to the first battery cell last week, and we're still working through sort of product readiness and getting and the design for manufacturing and whatnot on the platform and the truck. So we've got work to do there. We're looking at having those ready to be on the road next year. And I think while we haven't locked in who our very first deliveries are going to be, we've got a reservation list of 50,000 people. So I think what we will end up doing is looking through those and figuring out, okay, what use cases make the most sense. Does there happen to be someone like next door to our headquarters that we could work with? Because that would be super convenient. So I think there are a lot of factors that are going to play into figuring out, okay, where's truck number one going?
I mean, you brought up a really good point. You're bringing up use case. I mean, I think that that's really interesting that you had them do that in the reservation. You're saying like, this is what I do and this is why I want it. And I think that's really smart.
Well, it's important because we know that we'll ultimately have to do a dually. We'll have a 300-mile, 400-mile, and 500-mile range. We'll have different bed lengths. And so we'll need to really understand exactly what the requirements are of our first customers so that we show up with the right vehicle and the right product.
Yeah. It makes all the sense in the world, right product, right person, right place. Those are like the keys. And, you'd mentioned, we, and you keep saying we, obviously it implies that there's other people on your team. I mean, I'd love to know who else is kind of helping you guys with all this.
So we have a team of about 40 people. They're mostly engineers right now. So we have mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, firmware engineers, software engineers who are working to actually build this thing. So we've got a team of people right now. We need to go from those 40 to 160 in the next year. So we've got a lot of hiring to do, which is, I think it's super lucky being in the Valley right now because so many people and so much talent is actually relocating to the Valley anyways. So it puts us in a really good spot as we're looking to hire so many people in the next year.
How does that storytelling process go when you're recruiting this talent and you're describing, like, how is that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It can go a few different ways. We interview a lot of people who have worked in traditional automotive. So for them, this seems like sort of a crazy startup endeavor where we're doing things super differently. And a lot of the things that they're frustrated with when working at like a big OEM where things have always been done a certain way, they're excited to come and do things a little differently and sort of shake it up and take a risk. And so I think that piece of what we're doing is really exciting for some of those people. Other people come from EV startups. There's a lot of them in Phoenix. There's also a lot of them in Southern California. And it's a small world. And so the 15-minute charge time is what I think really excites a lot of those people because they've seen startup life, they get it, but what we're doing is really different in that way.
I mean, and it's getting to the point where you're getting to that number where you start to have to think about, what is our culture? What do we stand for beyond what we do? And what's that like?
Totally. I think company culture is something you have to be so intentional about, even when you're small, because before you know it, it starts to like take on a life of its own. And so we've been really thinking about it, and we try to build a culture where it feels like we are all on this team doing something impossible, and it's going to be hard. There's going to be challenges. It's going to be bumpy, but ultimately getting through those big challenges and coming out on the other side is what brings us really close together. I think that sort of grittiness and team dynamic has built a really fun culture. We've also hired people who've never worked in automotive. I'm one of them. And so by hiring people from all kinds of sort of diverse backgrounds, we've set this culture of like, you don't have to have done this before, but we believe you can do it now. And I think bringing people from all different backgrounds gives people awesome opportunity, and it's a blast.
And I mean, I hate to ask this question, but I'm always curious, this past year where you've had, the pandemic, you've had all these things come up. I mean, you were obviously experiencing growth at that time. How did you guys handle that?
COVID was, one of those things that none of us saw this coming, right? And as a startup at the time, we had literally moved into our facility from Mark's garage. We moved into headquarters. We were so excited. We finally had a real building, and like 10 days later, everybody went home and started working from home. So I think we had a unique edge in that we hadn't fully built a lot of process or anything yet. We were still figuring out how we were operating. And so by shifting to sort of this hybrid, a lot of people working from home, implementing all these safety protocols, by shifting to that, we were shifting to whatever we were going to be doing at that time anyway. And so we're just figuring it out as we go. And we were driving battery packs from people's driveways on one side of town to the other side of town and meeting up at charging stations. And you just sort of make it work. And I think it would have been a lot harder had we already established, okay, this is how we're going to operate. And we've been able to hire people from all over the place because we had so many people remote anyways.
So, I mean, is that remote, semi-remote, hybrid work lifestyle something you think you'll carry on with?
I think it depends. In general, yes, but there are certain jobs, and we even saw this through last summer, where you can't be working on a truck from home, right?
That's true.
There's certain jobs where you just have to be touching the product. And so I think what it's taught us is how to figure out what those jobs are and how to set really clear expectations around, okay, this is one of those things. If you're the guy who's driving the bolts into the platform, you're going to have to be there. But if you're programming software, you probably don't. So I think it's a case-by-case basis, but that flexibility will allow us to hire a lot faster.
Yeah. And I mean, that, kind of brings us to the next thought of, as you're building out your team and you were creating that process, did that kind of help kind of really define people's roles? Because when you're in a startup, you're like, I do this and I do that and I do this. But now if you're not right next to so-and-so, I mean, you have to draw some lines. How did that go?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like in the beginning, everybody does everything, and that just comes with growing, is figuring out, okay, what are sort of the walls that we're building around particular roles. But that being said, we hire people that we know can move and cover lots of different things. And we've had to pivot like multiple times. If something's not working, we mix it up, we make a change, we bail and do something different. And so hiring people who thrive in that sort of pivot fast, break things, iterate quickly, move on scenario has allowed us to do that without having to hire very specific people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, jack of all trades, master of none, it should be on most entrepreneurs' resumes.
Yes. There are a handful of roles, though, where you really need a specialist. So we have this awesome woman. She's our battery chemistry engineer. She is a battery chemistry engineer. She will always be a battery chemistry engineer. So I think it's just figuring out exactly what those roles are that require super specific talent, and for the others, going for people who are going to be able to pivot.
Yeah, it's like you do marketing, but you also know your way around some social media. You're not just advertising, but
Absolutely.
battery chemist, you don't want someone that's like, I could probably do that.
Yeah, no,
I'll give it a try.
no, not really a trial and error role.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of, trial and error in general, I'd love to know some of the obstacles that you have encountered, and maybe if there's an example that you're like, we worked through this and how that went.
Ooh, that's a great question. Gosh, I feel like there's so many. Let me think. Let me
Pick,
think of one specifically.
it's like pick your favorite.
Yeah, exactly.
Which one gave you the most heartache?
Yeah. So I think my one story I love is we were figuring out exactly what our battery cell design was going to be, and we had gotten to this point where we knew, okay, we've got the design locked. Now it's time to build it. And to build a battery, you need to have a dry room, and dry rooms cost millions of dollars. And we are a startup. We're always raising money, but there are times where we don't want to wait to raise another round to keep making progress. And so instead of saying, okay, bummer, we'll just have to wait until we get that next check to start making progress on the dry room, we actually said, okay, well, what is a dry room? A dry room is a room that is made dry by humidifiers and air conditioners and insulation and all these things. And we actually built a room and built a dry room from scratch. And it was one of those things that I think seems obvious now, but at the time we really felt stumped because we were like, shoot, we don't have the money, we don't have the time, we don't want to wait, we're so close on this thing, how do we do it? And the answer to how we do it is you go to Home Depot, you buy a bunch of 2x4s, you start building walls, you put the walls up, and you start figuring out, okay, how do we make this room meet the temperature and humidity requirements? And ultimately, we've got a DIY dry room that is more dry than even the dry room we would get if we spent the millions from the big sort of companies who would build one for us.
Wow. How long did it take to build that?
Not very long. Maybe a month, 6
Really?
weeks. Yeah, super fast. Which was another great reason to do it ourselves, because if we had gone through some of these big suppliers and contractors and program managers, it would have been a 6-month project at least.
I mean, there's your next business venture, building dry rooms.
Yeah. Honestly, so Vincent on our team built it. He could totally do it. He could spin off and be a dry room company.
Man, I mean, that's so interesting, because I mean, you think of something and you're like, oh, that has to be, that's so expensive, we can't buy that. But to think can we make it? I mean, you're right. I mean, hindsight, you're like, oh, of course. But coming to that process of there's nothing that we can't accomplish is really, it speaks volumes to the mentality of your team.
I think that's another key piece of our culture too, is we don't stop or slow when there's an obstacle. We just figure out another way. And that's what our battery tech is at its core, but also how we go about solving all these other problems that come up.
Yeah, I mean, it makes all the sense in the world. And as you guys are building, the strategy with your team and you're bringing people in, I'm assuming, do you guys have a board of directors at this point?
We do. It is small, but we do. So right now it's Mark and myself, and we just added our first independent board director, Britt Ide, who is awesome. She is an expert in the utility space. Mm-hmm. So she's really helped us with connections for fundraising, but also for figuring out, okay, how is our product going to integrate with the grid, and how do we need to be working with these utility companies for charging, but also for electrifying their fleets.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you think of companies having a board, but when I think of a startup and when someone actually starts getting a board, it's like things are getting real.
Yeah.
We have a board, we have people we have to report to beyond ourselves and putting it together.
It felt that way internally too. It was, it definitely felt like, okay, we've got someone who's really helping us, which is great, but also, okay, someone to report to and someone to keep up to date and someone to make sure that we're not, going off a cliff, which is, it's been super valuable. I think, while it may be scary for an entrepreneur at first, because it feels like, okay, there's someone else in the room now.
Yeah.
It's been a really good thing for us.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of things that are, scary to entrepreneurs, I mean, I'd love to just kind of, do you have any advice or anything that you could share with, young up and coming entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I guess
It's such a broad question.
Big question. I think you just keep going, and that might sound stupid, but there's always going to be something going wrong and something not going to plan, and there's never going to be the right amount of money or the right amount of talent or whatever it is. And at ATLIS, we just keep going and we figure it out when we solve problems, and we've made it really far. And I think while that can be scary at first, you can make a list of all the reasons why ATLIS is going to fail. But we just keep going. And the more of those like scary times that you overcome, the more confidence, at least I've gotten, in the fact that we just keep going.
Yeah, it's like we don't have millions to buy a dry room. We got to do it. Let's go to Home Depot.
Exactly. Yeah, I think you can't let things like that are out of your control, like fundraising and talent and hiring and the speed at which all these things happen. You can't let that slow you down. You just got to find a way to keep making progress while those things move at the paces that they move.
It's like we might not be able to touch that right now, but we can go 100 miles and fix this other issue. And then maybe along the way we're doing that, we'll figure this part out.
Totally.
Well, I would just love to give our listeners information on how they can learn more about your company, if they should be following you on social media anywhere. How do they know more about you guys?
Yes, definitely follow ATLIS Motor Vehicles on Instagram and Facebook. We're posting content and progress shots daily. I'm biased. I think it's really exciting to follow, but hopefully they will too.
I love it. You're like, oh, this is so exciting. Everyone read this.
Well, literally every post, I'm like so fired up about it. Mark is so fired up about it. And we have to check ourselves and be like, does this mean anything to anybody else? Sometimes it does.
I love that. You're like liking each other's posts. You're like, you're like, this is great. Well, I have enjoyed our conversation so much, and I'm really looking forward to watching you guys conquer all that is batteries.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. This has been a blast.